May I invite Mr. Alvis Kong, partner of Deloitte, to give us a presentation. Mr. Kong, please.
Okay, first of all, thanks BEC for having Deloitte on the stage to share our thoughts on partnership and financing. So before the start, good morning to everyone, distinguished guests and speakers. So when we're talking about financing, I just want to share, some of the practices globally and what Deloitte involved in Hong Kong's Northern Metropolis. We know Northern Metropolis is a mega project. So basically, 1/3 of the Hong Kong is developing at the same time. So we're actively participating not just in their large-scale land development, but also pioneering some of the BOT projects across the blue-green infrastructure resilience, and also the development of the new development areas, what we call the NDAs. But let's just skip the marketing part. Let's focus on the topics. Why these opportunities become unprecedented for Hong Kong. So everybody know Northern Metropolis is 1/3 of Hong Kong, but if we're going to count into it, there are more than 14 NDA, new development areas. So it's also very different from the past, because in the older days, we have our property development. We have our R+P model, and we get used to it. But going to the futures, we know Northern Metropolis as one of the key parts in the 15.5 national plans. The key essence of it is to have industry in it. We all know industry is a long-term investment. So the key question to unlock the PPP here is how to bridge the industry together with the infrastructure and make it a commercially viable structure. That's the reason why this is just a snapshot. When we're looking into the Northern Metropolis, zoom in into some of the 14 NDAs. We know these areas are very industry-driven, and people consider it as a long-term investment to get the return back. So how are we going to unlock the question? We see there are 3 challenges, basically, that we need to address. So basically, it's volume. Second, it's a time frame. It's really long. When we are talking about property development, we know cash flow is important. 3 years cash return is some of the prerequisites. But when we are looking into developments that span long, more than 10 to 20 years, this becomes another question for us to solve. Third is about complexity. It's more than property development, more than rail, more than road. It's about industry. When we're talking about industry, it's no longer finance and logistics. We were talking about biotech, advanced manufacturing. For these industry, we don't have much experience in Hong Kong. How we're going to combine it and package it into PPP. And out of all these complications, we know there's a new agenda from the Hong Kong government and also from the commercial society. We're trying to push PPP to go forward. But before that, let's take a step back, take a look. The last, what I called true PPP that we did is West Tunnel. It's like more than 20 years ago as BOT. And in between, we have a lot of DBO contracts. These contracts, when we're moving into more leveraging of the private financing, it could be a very different game for the commercial to get into it, to play, to make sure the project is investable, bankable. So as today we're having a panel speaking section later on, we're not going to dive deep into details how to make it work from a financial point of view, but more from a framework point of view, what makes it new for Hong Kong in terms of PPP. When we're looking into the PPP, we know globally it's growing. In Hong Kong, and also from the World Bank, there's a lot of acronyms in terms of PPP, from DBB, DBO to DBFO, BOT. But today, we're not dived into these acronyms. What we're trying to say is from Deloitte's experience in driving PPP in mainland China, globally in Hong Kong, we think there are 3 dimensions potentially that is relevant for Hong Kong and we should think more about. The first is about new build versus existing asset. In the older days, we always think about building a new tunnel, a new road, how to finance the infrastructure per se of that infrastructure. But if we take a step back to take a look, Hong Kong is a very established city. We are developed cities. We have a lot of infrastructure, that has already in the portfolios. Just use sewage water plant as an example. We see a lot of new water plant is going to be built, but our existing water plant in Hong Kong is already 70 to 80 up and running. They are good assets to be packaged together. So the first question is how to build our PPP portfolio, not just looking into the new build, but new build plus existing asset. The second thing is about land. In Hong Kong, we are getting very familiar with land sales because it accounts for a very significant portion of our Hong Kong government's revenue. But how to capture the value of land sales is important. If we benchmark other cities, including Singapore and also other overseas markets, we see that land value could change a lot along the development cycle. If we could benchmark or if we could capture the land value after it's developed and coupled with the industry in today's context, we could help the government's reserve much more. Third is about from transaction to strategic partnerships. When we're talking about financing, we're always talking about project finance. It's very standalone financing, standalone infrastructures. But if we're moving along from this concept into strategic partnership, this is what the Hong Kong government is proposing in forming SPVs, statutory bodies. This could ensure that investors could have a longer appetite of return. So as a starting point of today's panel sections, we are not going to share the details of these case studies, but what we are trying to share, these models are well established globally. So talking about the existing asset, what we call the TOT model, is widely used in mainland China, especially for the utilities and blue-green infrastructure. When we're talking about land sales, what we call land value capture, is a World Bank model. So we're talking about how to capture the land value early to ensure the land sales has a higher value. One example is from Japan. Everybody knows Japan's residential market or property market has been going down a lot throughout the past 10, 20 years. But we see cases in a lot of districts in Japan, their residential price and commercial price is selling at a value that is against the market. So the LCV model could be applicable in Hong Kong. Third is about SPVs. So when the government is pushing forward SPVs, we're not saying we need to form another statutory body as these simple layers. Well, SPVs has a lot of different functions. If we're going to benchmark, Singapore or other cities like the JTCs, we see SPVs could create substructures and also could involve strategic investors along different stage of the development to ensure the 20 years of development cycle of the PPP could be potentially sustainable. Just to set the stage, so we leave 5 remarks here. If we're going to think along PPP in Hong Kong, the key takeaways, I think the first thing is beyond financing. We got to think about the business model. If we don't have the top line, we don't have the revenue stream from the development that we have, how are we going to pay back the financing? So the commercial model and the revenue model is very important. Second, of course, is the financing structure. Third is about the risk allocation mechanism. While the fourth is about the involvement and influence of the governance body, including the SPV. While the fifth point is about exit, because every investors want to have a good window to exit. So if we're going to involve them early for a new development of 20 years, what are the exit windows we're going to leave them? So here is not a concluding remark because we're just kicking start the panel sections. Well, I will leave the time for the leader today to kickstart our panel section. We could still dive deeper into some of the topics during the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kong, and please be seated. Before we start our panel discussion, as a reminder, online participants are welcome to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our speakers. For the audience in this room, please raise your hands and we'll pass you the mic. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator of this session, Mr. Merlin Lau, Head Policy and Research of BEC. Maybe just leave some time for our workers to set the stage first. And please also join me in welcoming the other panelists on stage for the panel discussion. They are, once again, Mr. Alvis Kong, Ms. Frances Chen, Director, Sustainability and Climate Change, North Asia HSBC, Ms. Sophie Leclerc, CEO, ADM Capital Foundation, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, who will be joining us online today, Mr. Ryan Yip, Vice President and Executive Director of Public Policy Institute, our Hong Kong Foundation, and last but not least, Ms. Tracy Wong Harris, Executive Vice President, Hong Kong Green Finance Association, and Private Capital Mobilization Strategy Advisor, who will also be joining us online. And I will now pass the time to you, Merlin, please.
Okay, testing. Thank you. Tracy, you can hear us well? I just want to make sure. All good, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you guys well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again for joining this panel. My name is Merlin, and I think instead of me, giving the context again, Alvis already gave already a good overview about the topics we are trying to dive in this section about PPP plus another P on a philanthropic angle. As you can see, this lineup, we actually brought in different perspectives like consultancy, public policy think tank, philanthropic angle, and of course from a banking perspective, commercial banking, as well as Tracy Online with various experience on institutional capital, as well as her previous commercial and investment banking experience. So I'm not going to introduce the panel list again. What I'm going to do is to ask 3 key questions setting, and then we have some backup question, and then but I think we are quite tight on time. We will see how it goes. The 3 angle we are trying to cover would be the first one, actually the government's role, the public anchor in structuring all this PPP, which Alvis shared some views already. The second part, we will try to talk about the mobilizing private capital as well as bankability consideration. And the last main question we want to chip in is the role of philanthropic capital, and also given the strategic values in the Northern Metropolis is also a very ecologically sensitive areas. So how we look into natural capital in all this consideration. So that's how I structure this discussion. So I will just kickstart and try to save some more time. I will put it on stage to Ryan first, because apart from Alvis made a presentation from Deloitte, we know our Hong Kong Foundation has also mentioned in previous work, your study, that traditional models such as real property model are not sufficient yet for this sheer scale of Northern Metropolis development. And also you advocate a similar mechanism on SPVs. And so my question is, from a policy perspective, how should the government effectively set up these SPVs or platform company to share risk and attract private partners? And you can take it and elaborate your perspective. Thank you.
Right. I think we can just let's take a step back and look at what are the most critical questions of Northern Metropolis right now. It's not about planning. We have enough plans. We have all these NDAs. We have all this. We have the development strategies. We have the action agenda. We have a lot of this. So it's not about planning. It's about execution. It's about putting it in place. And I think in terms of executions, there are 2 problems. One is there's not a single entity within the government that is responsible for the Northern Metropolis, right? So everyone is responsible for part of it. You have the development bureaus on all the lands, and then you have the TLB on road and other infrastructures. You have AIIB on tech. You have CEDB on on bringing in all the enterprises. So as there's a sayings, if there's one thing that everyone is responsible, that means no one is responsible, right? So I guess the one thing that we have to think about is an internal mechanism within the governments on the Northern Metropolis. That's number one. The second one is financing. I think Alvis mentioned it a little bit. The problem of Northern Metropolis is that it is nothing like anything that we did in the past, right? In the past, we did all the new towns, it's all property focused, it's heavily property related. And for property development, the features of it is it's easy for you to look at the expected returns. So it's easy for the property developers, for all these companies to get loans from the banks. But Northern Metropolis is nothing like that. It's not about housing. It's about bringing in all these new industries. It's about, can we get all these strategic enterprises that come into Northern Metropolis? Well, it's the make or break of Northern Metropolis. It's not about housing. It's about, like you said, whether we can build in the new economic center. And that is something that the banks in Hong Kong has never seen before. So it's hard for them to have a price on the financing on loans. So, and also number one and number two is long-term nature of all these development projects. It takes 10, 20 years. So from the private sector, number one is hard to get a loan that match the tenor of the developments. Secondly is on the price of the financing, right? So that's how we come up with our ideas of, firstly, setting up a dedicated office within the government to oversee the development of the Northern Metropolis. The most practical way is really to upgrade the existing NMCO, the Northern Metropolis Coordination Office, to upgrade it, to put it directly under the CE or the FS, to give it a single approval power for everything that happens in the Northern Metropolis, be it land development, be it all these incentives to attract enterprises, but then with this responsibilities, it comes with these powers. It also comes with responsibilities. So we think this upgraded central office has to be solely responsible for the delivery of the Northern Metropolis, right? So you have a single entity within the government that is solely responsible for the delivery of the Northern Metropolis. So that is number one on the government's level, right? You give clear responsibility. And then secondly, on the execution level, we propose to have different platform companies that is responsible for the different NDAs. You have like 14 NDAs, but really, the really important one is really 4 or 3, right? You have Shantin, you have Hong Shui Kiu, you have Lau Fao Shan, right? And also the Loop. So we propose to have 3 or 4 different platform companies that is responsible for each of the NDAs. And these platform companies, firstly, they are not statutory body, so it's easier for them to set up. And secondly, they are fully owned by the governments, right? And thirdly, they are not part of the government. The beauty of it is they are not part of the government. They are not a government department, but they are just a companies. They are just like normal companies like Deloitte, but then they are fully owned by the governments, right? So that gives the companies a lot of flexibilities in terms of how can they allocate the lands, how can they do, for example, joint ventures with the private companies. And most importantly is you have to have clear KPIs to all these companies, right? That is aligned with the development objective of the respective NDAs. So you have, let's say that the Shantin is for biotech, and then the Hong Shui Kiu is for high-end logistics. So you need to have clear KPIs to these platform companies that match the objectives of this of all these NDAs. And the most important point is, for the private market, it means the government is having a stake, having a monetary stake. They are putting their own money into the development of all these companies. So they are not just selling out the lands and then they just,拍拍籮柚走人, right? It's like they are putting their own money, they are putting their own stake on the whole development of the Northern Metropolis. And this gives confidence. Firstly, it gives confidence to the private market. And secondly, I think it also gives a clearer, a timeline for the financing sector as well. And I think most importantly is you have a clear objective and also timeline for all these platform companies, right? And also you can also have different PPP models that you mentioned. I think the most importantly is how can you share the risk with the private sector? Is you do not pass on all the risk to the private sector. So on top of the traditional BOT, BDO, there are a few things that the government can do. One is what we call the guaranteed revenue model. That means the government will guarantee a minimum revenue levels that the operating companies can get, and if that's below that level, the government will actually top up on that level. So this gives a certainty for the operating companies for them to get financing for the banks, right? And of course, there are also other things that the government can do. They can do, simply they can guarantee the loans for the companies, and so I think. But all these are technical details, right? So I think most importantly is you get the governance structure set up right, which is on the government level, you have a single entity that's responsible for the delivery of the Northern Metropolis, and then on the execution level, you have all these different platform companies that is responsible for the development of all these NDAs as a master developers.
Just quickly, Alvis, any supplementary information on that?
Or just brief supplement on this. So Brian already mentioned about the governance and the flexibilities. Probably I share a little bit more. If today the government is going to say, I give you all the flexibility to set up the SPVs, then what are you going to do? So from the experience of Deloitte, we see there are two major bottlenecks. One major bottleneck is industry. The second major bottleneck is about initiations. Let me start with the first. So when we are looking, let's say, using Hongshui and Suntin as an example, they're already very different industry focus. If we just look into the rental income divided by the construction costs in Hong Kong, it's a very simple math. It could be a lower single-digit IRR. So the question would be how to couple with the industry players of the respective zones, for example, their operating income, to become part of the revenue model of the PPP, so that at least make the IRR somehow commercially viable. We are talking about not high, at least 6 to 10%. So this is one borderline. While the second borderline is initiations. We work with a lot of investors in Hong Kong. Everybody think the Northern Metropolis is great visions. But who is going to start first? So when we are looking into the SPV, if government have the flexibilities, how they could leverage their capital to kickstart is very important. I think this also echoes very much with today's philanthropic topics. They are higher risk capitals, but if we are looking into government's initiative today, they're injecting, $10 billion into the SPVs, respectively for 3 SPVs. 10 billion is a lot, but if we're talking about construction, it's not a lot. So the question is how to leverage this 10 billion for each of the park company to have better leverage with the private capital, from philanthropic to LPGP in the market. This would be a more sustainable thought to leverage the SPV to kickstart the momentum of the Northern Metropolis. That's my thought.
Thank you, Alvis. Tracy, we'll bring it to you. We also talk about de-risking, and as I introduce you, you wear multiple hats now, including multilateral development bank like AIIB, and also your experience in commercial and investment banking. So from your perspective, when evaluating these early stage mega projects, what specific governance structures or government guarantee do you see needed? And alongside how multilateral and other institutions can actively leverage this credit support or cornerstone capital that signals safety to the rest of the market? Thank you.
Thanks, Merlin, and good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize I couldn't be there with you in person and for any poor internet connection in advance. And thank you, BEC, for inviting me, sharing this important topic, and I wish BEC a successful conference today. Coming back to your questions about greenfield early stage mega projects. So when institutions evaluate early stage mega projects, the core question is whether risk-adjusted return can be underwritten with sufficient confidence. And at greenfield stages, projects, you can imagine uncertainty in both real and perceived is very high. And construction risk, demand risk, regulatory risk, execution risk, and has to be resolved for institution money to come in. So let me come in with like 3 structural foundations that determine whether capital participation can come in at scale. So first of all, I think earlier speakers already shared a lot in terms of the governance and structural clarity. So for the vehicle or the platform, that it must be institutionally structured with some of this quality, including bankruptcy remote SPV, ring-fenced transparent cash flow, defined revenue waterfall, clear procurement reporting standard, independent oversight, etc. I think this is where MDBs often engage early to strengthen the governance as standard. And secondly, is about explicitly risk allocations. And greenfield risk is including construction, completion risk, demand usage, volatility, policy and regulatory shift, changing landscape of this in today's world. So institution investor cannot absorb open-ended uncertainty. So this is where governments and MDB become the catalytics, can become catalytics through some of partial credit guarantees, revenue floor that Ryan mentions, availability-based payment structure, subordination, first loss extracts, etc. These two help to kind of reduce the range of downside risk. And let me bring in an example here to make this real. So a few weeks ago, I hope that you see the Pakistan Panda bond transactions, which is 1.7 billion renminbi. This is where MDBs like AIIBs and ADB both provided sovereign guarantee to support the material enhancement on the credit quality, and it helped to crowd in private institutional investor coming in. The transaction effectively helped to, uplifted a CCC credit rated to AAA, and also leveraging the Panda bond RMB lower funding cost environment. It overall helped to save the funding cost about 5%, and also crowd in institutional investor, and the transaction was oversubscribed by 5 times. So I think this is an example how the collaboration between MDB, governments, and the private sector come along, and with the use of guarantee and structure. The third example, the third point I want to share is cornerstone participations, which help to strengthen the market signal of this early stage transaction. And we don't have to look too far. So back in 2024, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority acted as asset manager for a Asia Climate Transition Fund, which closed at $560 million US. And with Hong Kong MA participating as an anchor investor alongside with multilateral development bank, and this commitment helped to crowd in more institutional capital into regional climate transition strategy. So what changed is the actual project and asset did not change, but you see how the structure and use of structure and collaboration help to de-risk at its inception. And the role of public anchor capital can play for the Northern Metropolis. I stop here and happy to share more example later.
Thank you, Tracy. With that, I think then actually we can move it to Francis to talk about the private capital stack type. Looking at the massive infrastructure and development needs of the metropolis, so what makes it the project there genuinely bankable from HSBC perspective, and what kind of broad financing instruments are needed to join such a corporate capital?
Thank you, Merlin, for the question, and thank you, BEC, for having us on the panel this morning. Actually, I think Ryan, Alvis, and Tracy have touched on some of the points that I was going to take. Honestly, I think we all have the same ask, which is very, very encouraging to see that we're all aligned. I think there are a few key considerations for commercial banks like HSBC for us to feel comfortable in coming in and to be able to support the PPP that the government intends to put out. The first is around, again, a transparent and coordinated, ideally centralized PPP, be it framework, be it model, be it handbook. But we need to understand, as Alvis has mentioned, there are quite a few different PPP models, and we have been in discussion with the various bureaus of the government, but we would like to understand which PPP model the government intends to use. And we also understand Northern Metropolis is a really big piece of developer land that requires different projects within. So we don't really necessarily expect one PPP model to work for the entire area, but rather it's really just understanding, I think maybe even just project by project, case by case, which PPP model and framework they intend to use so that we can better support. This then brings to my second point, because the PPP framework and the model directly affects the type of risk-sharing mechanism that will be discussed or will be put on the table. And of course, from a financial institution perspective, we hope to have a balanced risk-sharing mechanism. Tracy has gone through various mechanisms that is available, which we're happy to discuss. But in the end, I think the risk-sharing mechanism that's in place will then allow us to better determine the bankability of the different projects. I understand that we've talked about how longer tenors tend to be difficult to finance, and it is indeed challenging, but to be frank, I think this is something that the commercial banks can overcome. This is because we don't really ever expect one single financial instrument to be able to cover the entire duration of a PPP. What we actually expect is that we all know all the banks have a suite of financial instruments, and what we are expecting is to understand the PPP model, and based on the project, the different financial instruments will come in at different times of the lifetime of the project. So if I mean, very simple example that I think everybody in the room would know is that, for instance, the tenor for a loan versus a bond is very different. So you will have to deploy instruments at different timing. And another point is, of course, we understand these developments are very exciting, and there will be various supply chains that will be activated to support these development. So as for instance, for a bank like HSBC, we're already talking to different suppliers that will be supporting the development of the Northern Metropolis, different areas. And in this sense, the financial instruments that you would provide for a suppliers, for instance, versus SPV, et cetera, all of these will be quite different. But this is something that I think is quite doable. I mean, commercial banks have supported, but in the end, it's just, I understand this is a big project that all of us are very excited to work on, but we are at the phase where we're trying to kind of clarify right from the start on what that model should look like.
Thank you. I think you also addressed a point on the long duration perspective. Back to Tracy. Following up on Francis, beyond this, do you have any more points to add regarding the financial instruments or de-risking mechanism for private capital?
Sure. I think some of the typical issues been already spoken about the early stage risk, long duration capital, and regulatory capital treatments often from global asset manager insurance spoke about and facing these projects. And I think I want to come in beyond green bonds, like free structural solutions to come in back here. I think today, I think a lot of speakers already talked about PPP. So I guess I want to emphasize on having a platform that is catalytic, blended capital platform. And I apologize, Travis, I have to introduce another piece. So beyond the public-private partnership, I also want to introduce the philanthropics piece. So I call it the 4 Ps now. So so basically having a catalytics blended 4-piece platform is what I have in mind. And rather than financing asset by asset, I think Northern Metropolis could consider this type of catalytics platform vehicle with multi-layers of risk. So for example, having the first loss public capital coming through and having family office philanthropics to take on the more junior participation, and then having the senior tranche structure for insurance and pension funds. And these layers approaches are allowed different risk appetites to coexist in one platform, one structure. So let me use another example. A very successful precedent, the Bayfront Infrastructure Securitization Platform. And this is this Bayfront aggregation infrastructure platforms are aggregating infrastructure loan and securitize them into multi-tier rated tranches. And this attracts institutional investor who could not participate in a standalone project by project basis. And what made this powerful was the replicable platform structure. It allows to bring the scale. It has repeat issuance of 8 times by now, and each time is between 400 to 700 million US dollar. So you can see the platform and the repeatable scale that is important. I think secondly, I want to share is about the debt for nature risk transfer structure. So we heard the importance of addressing on the debt and nature piece. So I just come in with an example. A Bahamas debt to nature conversion, which is a sovereign debt was refinanced by a credit enhancement, which lower the borrowing cost and with embedded a long-term conservation commitment. It demonstrates how credit enhancements and environmental outcome can be integrated into this capital structure. And what I really want to call out here is that this transaction is where MDB, insurance company, and a U.S. family office collectively help to provide credit guarantee for significant improvement of the credit enhancement. I think the savings about just shy of 5%. And this interest saving was used to refinance on for the nature conservation. I think for Northern Metropolis, particular for the blue and green and resilient infrastructure, similar blended structure could mobilize capital and beyond traditional source of commercial capital.
Thank you.
I know that we're running out of time. Last I want to say is about the credit enhancement infrastructure instrument, which we talk a lot already about MDB guarantee, political risk insurance, revenue back infrastructure notes, insurance wrap debt, and example that I shared earlier, all the examples, including the Pakistan Panda Bond demonstrations is how the use of guarantee come into place. So I'm not going to repeat that and give the time back to the panel speakers.
Thank you, Tracy. We have more than this. We actually have more time than this call, so don't worry too much. Then actually, Sophie, Tracy already touched upon the philanthropic capital and the last P coming in. We know this P is not going to fund direct, capital investment. I think, Sophie, you're going to touch upon, at what stage this philanthropic capital would come in, maybe particularly also in the Northern Metropolis context. And you want to put on your slide? Yeah. Can we put on that one slide? It's going to help. Yes.
Thank you, Merlin. Thank you for having us here today. And the last P, they're certainly not the least, I can say, for philanthropy. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that philanthropy is a broad spectrum, and there are different kinds of philanthropists, and we talk about it as sort of one thing. We have philanthropists sort of traditional, that you know, there's a need, sort of disaster, and someone steps in and provides funds. Then there's a trust-based philanthropy, where a philanthropic organisation will fund no strings attached organisation, leave it very much up to an organisation or a project to run because it has a trust in that organisation. Then you have strategic philanthropy and venture philanthropy, and I think that's what we're talking about today. It's those philanthropists that are thinking more strategically, looking for where they can add value, where they can see a problem, look at monitoring, measurement, achieving targets. Venture philanthropy, they may get more involved. So, for example, high potential NGOs, for example, they would perhaps be on the board, provide capacity building, a bit more like the venture capital model. And then there's catalytic philanthropy, which really is kind of where you're really trying to catalyze the funds for systemic change. Now, when I was sort of invited on the panel, one of the things we wanted to talk about was the wetland conservation and how to fund that through philanthropy, or how we can contribute. And I think that's quite important, because when we've been talking so far, I think we've been talking about the infrastructure of the development. One of the big issues with the Northern Metropolis is that the lack of income generation for the conservation management. And that's where I think philanthropy can really step in. And we have the chart over here. And what we're trying to show here, this chart's fine, yeah. So we have a chart on the project phases and funding sources, and this really shows where philanthropy has value. So the early stages of a project, and Francis mentioned that, you know, different staging of projects. The early stages where there's high project uncertainty, so higher risk, there's no income generation, so you're talking conceptual research, you're talking feasibility research. That's where philanthropic dollars can really make a difference. And we're already seeing that in Hong Kong. We've got some philanthropists have come together. They're funding a feasibility study for a significant reforestation project in the Northern Metropolis, but not part of the Northern Metropolis development, so in that location. And the idea is to do this feasibility study, come up with an investment plan, all philanthropically funded. Ideally, there will be a pilot study going ahead, depending on the outcome of the feasibility study. And that pilot study could be funded by philanthropists, but maybe not. We don't know at this stage. So that's just how you can see if philanthropic entities coming in early stage. Then as a project develops further, you'll see potentially, maybe I'll step back a bit. So what are we talking about in terms of these projects? We're talking ecological enhancement, potentially fish pond restoration. We're talking investing in aquaculture technologies, coastal defense, natural coastal defense systems, so mangroves, seagrasses, coral reefs, connecting corridors, connecting infrastructure. So when I'm talking about projects, sorry, that's what I'm talking about. So in the later stages, and where you may have also ecotourism, there may be some income generation. And then maybe you might attract some impact investors while the philanthropic funders are still funding those core restoration costs. And as the project matures and potentially scales from one wetland conservation park to a system where you've got connected parks, which the government has talked about, maybe you get more income generation from the different elements of the project, and as income becomes more predicted, potentially you could get institutional investment. But that's all a bit of a dream, because until the philanthropists know what the projects are, where they can contribute, it's kind of a hypothetical conversation, really. But certainly early stage, there's a definite value for the philanthropists, and the funds generally are much lower there. What's going to be more difficult is when the larger sums of money come in later in the project. So that's my contribution for time.
Thank you for that. We touch upon wetland conservation, blue-green infrastructure, and the payback period, etc. Then I think many people would be interested to hear this, the first biodiversity loan in Hong Kong, done by HSBC, Hang Seng Bank, and Henderson Land. So perhaps you can speak a little bit more about that, how HSBC, structured this, and how you value the natural capital in these innovative loans.
Great. Thank you, Merlin. So yes, indeed, we're very pleased alongside Hang Seng Bank to be able to support the first Hong Kong's first biodiversity loan with Henderson Land. So this is announced about now 2 weeks ago. This is a 100 million Hong Kong dollars biodiversity loan that we were able to jointly provide alongside Hang Seng Bank to Henderson Land. This is a loan that is aligned with the green loans principles for those who are familiar with the standards. But essentially, this means that this is a use of proceeds loan. So the loan, the borrowing, the loan is dedicated to very specific purposes of the development within the central yards, which Henderson Land is working on. And the loan is ring-fenced to be able to support funding the biodiversity enhancement measures and features within the development of the central yards. There are three main use of proceeds that this loan will go to. The first is around the planting of over 400 native species plants across the entire development. The second is around deploying essentially smart management systems for the urban forestry that they will be putting in place within the central yards. And last but not least, part of the use of proceeds can also be used for the continuous assessment and survey of the biodiversity status of the yards. So essentially, the way that we look at how natural capital could be measured, I think the key thing is that actually Henderson Land already conducted a biodiversity survey, a baseline survey, even during the tender stage. So they've started it early on. They have established a baseline, and what we do expect is a continuous evaluation of this throughout the process. And I think that's very key for being able to quantify what natural capital means. I think all of us understand that this is a nascent area, and there are a few frameworks out there, but I think a lot of times what's really missing is the starting point, which is the baseline data, and you can't really go back in time to collect that. So the fact that they're able to start right from the beginning to do so is very helpful. Another thing, of course, is that Henderson Land is also intending to target the obtainment of 10 top-tier green building certifications across the globe. And some of these certifications also have biodiversity and nature expectations and valuations built into the certifications as well. So that's kind of what gives us comfort in terms of what we can expect to see outside of this biodiversity lens. So that's something that we will continue to look at. But I just wanted to add a quick point on what Sophie has mentioned, which is the last P is certainly not the least P. I think for any financial institution or any corporates, or most specifically financial institutions, we do look at how we can support different things using the different capital stacks that we do have in our toolbox. So in certain circumstances, we do also use our philanthropic capital to support nature financing when we feel that perhaps it's not ready for the commercial stage just yet. So a quick example that I can share is that we've launched 2 months ago a global partnership called Financing for Resilient Landscapes. So this is funded out of HSBC Philanthropic Capital, but this is in partnership with ProForest, Nature Conservancy, and Conservation International. And what this partnership intends to do is to bring together 3 key stakeholders into one same platform. The first is around people who work on the landscape. So it's the local communities, it's the producers that's on the ground. The second group is around essentially all the global corporates who are sourcing their materials or commodities from these landscapes. A lot of these companies are actually working on the same landscapes, but they may not necessarily talk to each other when they're sourcing from the same landscape. And the last, of course, is to hopefully bring financial institutions in, because we want to catalyze more private capital into the funding of more resilient agricultural productions. So it's really to bring these 3 actors together, and the project will work on 4 critical landscapes in Brazil and 2 critical landscapes in Indonesia. So that's something that we're very keen to, we're very excited to kick off and explore how we can make resilient, nature-positive agricultural productions more financially incentive for private actors to come in. A lot of the global corporates that we know are funding this sometimes out of their philanthropic pocket as well. So we want to take that to the next level.
Thank you, Francis. I'm aware of the time, but I want to bring back to Sophie on that. We talk about this natural capital, wetland. Apart from the starting cost, there's this long-term management cost always. Same discussion when we talk about the Northern Metropolis long-term development. Same going into the wetland is very long-term scale. Who's going to pay for that? I know you brought up another slide. You want to touch upon that?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a pet project of ours.
Can we bring that slide? Yeah, thank you.
So as Merlin said, you know, we have the conservation management long term. It's in perpetuity. It's very different to grey infrastructure. Well, yes, it needs maintenance, but not in quite the same way. We've got you're talking about blue-green infrastructure. It's a living ecosystem. They're living systems, and they need a lot of time, project management over time. So what we would like to suggest is to rethink a little bit and start thinking about conservation trust funds. Now, Hong Kong's not new to conservation trust funds. We have the Environmental Conservation Fund. It was set up in 1994. It was originally $50 million set up, and then by 2011 there was 1.68 billion. And in 2013 the government endowed it with 5 billion. 4.7 billion of that went under the HKMA, who is now achieving investment returns linked to the Hong Kong Exchange Fund. That fund is allocating $200 to $300 million per year into conservation projects. Now those projects are defined according to the fund, mostly research and development, so the universities get quite a bit of money from it. They apply for the fund, and also what they call action projects, which was historically waste recycling, waste management, education type projects implemented by NGOs. Now the reason I bring this up is more recently the government has also created two funds that are sinking funds where it's drawn down the capital, and that was $1 billion for the Countryside Conservation Fund and $1 billion for the Landside Conservation Fund. For each of those funds, half of it went into minor works and half of it is for conservation projects for NGOs again. And so what I think our point would be, rather than have these sinking funds, why don't we think about, because we have this massive development, we have a conservation system, we have a wetland conservation network potentially. We've got the world's Ramsar site up there. We've got the wetland parks the government's committed to developing. There's a coastal conservation park it might be developing, and there's a whole potential there to create something very significant. So maybe we should be thinking about looking at how we can structure a conservation trust fund at this juncture in time. Maybe it's looking back at the ECF and having another tranche on ECF. Maybe it's a completely separate fund. But Hong Kong's done this successfully historically, and we see no reason why we shouldn't be thinking about doing this now for the Northern Metropolis and have a conservation trust fund. And this has been talked about for about 30 years in Hong Kong. Various entities and organizations keep bringing this up. So maybe it's time to do that. And the two funds that I mentioned that are $1 billion each were set up in 2018 and 2020. They've drawn down about, one of them is over 5 years, 220 million, and the other one's about 70 million over 4 years. So you can see that actually I think it's very doable in terms of the numbers if we could set something up. And the other thing with the Northern Metropolis, there is going to be pots of money, and we know there are pots of money, and there will be pots of money for the conservation management. The chances are it's not going to be long-term enough. So that's when we start, how can we pool these pots of money and do something innovative so that we have that stream of money coming in, those funds in perpetuity for the conservation of this incredible wetlands we've got in the Northern Metropolis.
I have 5 more minutes, so I just want to see 1 or 2 questions from the floor, if you have any. Or if you want to ask in the break, you can ask in the break. Okay, I will finish the 2 questions here. I think one question I want to pose it to Ryan and Alvis. The Northern Metropolis is also strategically designed to integrate or connect with Shenzhen and also the GBA. So from your context, what would be some of the urgent considerations to help remove some of these barriers and facilitate the investment from cross-border? So both for Ryan and Alvis.
Right. I think that's not specifically applied to PPP, but in general, we think about GBA is really about the flow of the 4 different factors, right? Human, people, goods and services, capital, and data. People, I think is relatively okay. We have all our border control points. It's not entirely perfect, but it's okay, right? And they are also doing a whitelist procedures within the Hetao that will give you a seamless, border crossing experience for a specific group of people. So I think flow of people is relatively okay. capital is the most critical part, but I think it is also the most difficult part for it for it to get through. Is especially mainland is right now is having an increasingly hard grip on the flow of capital. You look at what happens on Futo and all this broker house recently. So I think capital is critical, but it's hard to get through. But I think the two other things are also important and is having a higher chance. One is data. Data is, I think, is especially important. For instance, when we are doing, let's say, a biotech industry in Northern Metropolis, the most critical part of having all these new drugs is clinical trial. But Hong Kong being a 7 million people city, we only have so many cases. So what if we can tap into the biomedical data in GBA? If we can do clinical trials in GBA, then it would be a great help for all these biomedical companies in Hong Kong, right? And also when we are doing AI, if we can tap into data in mainland China, then we can really train the best AI model in Hong Kong, because it will be the only place in the world where we can use both mainland data and overseas data to train our models, right? So I think data is important, and I think it is also part of the discussions within the Hertao, right? Within Hertao on how they can access data on mainland. And goods and services, I think it's really about how we can tap into the mainland market while we are setting up company in Hong Kong. Again, using back the example of a biotech company, we all know that Hong Kong is right now in the process of formulating our own version of FDA, right? Our own version of a drugs approval authority. And what if, let's say we have our FDA done, what if the drugs that is approved in Hong Kong can automatically be approved by the NMPA, the China version of the drug approval authority, and can be automatically be sold and used in the other part of GBA and also mainland China, right? So I think that would again be a great help for all these biotech companies in Hong Kong. So I think all in all, I think as I mentioned, people, we are doing relatively okay. Capital, critical but difficult. But I think the two most promising part right now is goods and services and also the data flow within the GBA cities.
Thank you. Alvis, can you be brief?
Sure. Just a quick word. I'm writing on what Ryan said. I think if we're looking into the GBA, apart from looking at it from a Hong Kong's angle, let's try to put on a different hat. Look at it from a mainland angle. Why mainland would need Hong Kong? So I think of two perspectives potentially could be relevant. One is now we all know the market in mainland is very competitive. A lot of mainland companies would like to go overseas. And some of these companies would like to leverage Hong Kong to go overseas to form their headquarters here, or even to form some of their pilot manufacturing lines. This would be potentially the investor who is willing to pay the premium above the rental. So we need to be very specific about the industry players and also the potential strategic investors that is looking into the Northern Metropolis. This is for one hand. And the second hand is when we're talking about investments beyond property, we also need to think about for mainland China need Hong Kong. Particularly for certain industries, they would need Hong Kong to attract the talent. Because for all the benchmarking cases that we've done, what makes the valuation of a new zone development? It is not how beautiful the property that you build. It's who are the talent living there? What is the economic model in GDP that it brings about? So these are the elements that we need to think about how we could create cross-border talent to let them to live there. This talent is not just the PhD talent. We're talking about some new types of talent, what we call the gray collar, not blue collar, not white collar, somebody who could be the technicians to use some kind of new equipment, advanced manufacturing. This could create the populations, could create tax, could create GDPs. So these are some food for thoughts for your questions.
Thank you. Tracy, closing thought from you to help me close this section briefly. What is the single most, your observation on regulatory change or financial tool, say in Hong Kong in the next 5 years that you observe would be very important to help us finance the Northern Metropolis? Can you please be brief on this, and then we finish the section? Thank you.
I try, okay? So I think the successful financing for Northern Metropolis requires two complementary levers. First is capital mobilizations, and for that I come in with a regulatory lens. So the effective implementation of the risk-based capital regime is critical. So insurance balance sheet is one of the few pools of Hong Kong few pools in Hong Kong capable of deploying long duration capital at scale. So the Northern Metropolis, especially its climate resilient infrastructure such as flood mitigation, resilient transportations, corridors, built environment, integrated blue and green system, and will require precisely that type of capital. And if infrastructure, particularly for climate and resilient asset, is treated competitively and operationally within the RBC framework, insurance can become cornerstone allocators. So the Hong Kong Insurance Authority is rolling out the updated RBC soon. And I encourage everyone to actively engage HKIA to ensure it have effective implementation for climate resilient infrastructure, because capital responds to capital treatment. But mobilizations alone is not sufficient. So secondly, the capital structure. So many of the assets, again, in Northern Metropolis require adaptation infrastructure, water resilient, distribute energy, circular, nature positive system. And this sit in the missing middle. They are too early, too fragmented, and too complex for conventional commercial capital to come in on a standalone basis. So this is where Hong Kong has the opportunity to go beyond green bonds to build the 4 Ps, public-private philanthropic partnerships platform, and an execution platform that can originate, prepare, de-risk, aggregate, and refinance portfolio at scale. So the platforms could need to do alignments with the government's missions, national missions priority, deploy catalytic capital strategically, and pooling smaller projects into institutionally grade portfolio and create refinancing pathway into capital markets. And so RBC, the risk-based capital, mobilize institutional capital, and the 4P platform, 4P catalytics platform makes resilient infrastructure investable. So together, they create a condition for long-term capital to flow, particularly into climate resilient and transition-aligned infrastructure. So if Northern Metropolis is to be both economically competitive and climate ready, Hong Kong will need both rights capital framework and the right capital platform. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Actually, help me to close this section. I know we are overrunning time, and I will just save the time. With that, please give a round of applause to our panelists, and please feel free to network with them.
Thank you to our panelists and also Merlin for bringing us an insightful discussion on the aspect of risk mitigation of the cross-sectoral partnerships in the Northern Metropolis project. And please come forward for a group photo. Thank you once again, and please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the first session. We will now have a break for refreshments. Our guest of honor for today, Mr. David Lam, Undersecretary for Development, will deliver a keynote speech right after the break at 11:15. You may also scan the QR codes placed around the venue to view and download the instant photos. Thank you, and see you in a bit.